They called her the broken miniature. They called her the pocket wolf. They called her things that no person with a shred of decency would ever say out loud. And yet they said them anyway, loudly, in the middle of training yards and ceremony halls and dining rooms, where the entire Ironmore pack could hear every single syllable. Mara Ashvale had grown up with those words clinging to her skin like a second coat of fur, and by the time she was 22 years old, she had learned something that most people in her position never figure out. She had learned the difference between being broken and being misread, and she had decided quietly, in the private chambers of her own heart, that she was never going to let anyone else define what she was. The Ironmore pack was not a cruel pack by design. It was a pack built on tradition, on the bones of 100 years of warrior culture where physical size was the first and most important currency of respect. The elders measured children at birth, and at each turning year, recording heights and weights in leather-bound books, as if those numbers contained all the information anyone would ever need to understand a wolf's worth. In Ironmore, a tall wolf was a strong wolf. A wide wolf was a powerful wolf. A wolf who stood at only 155 centimeters at the age of 22, as Mara did, was something the culture simply did not have a flattering word for. She was an anomaly, an inconvenience to the story the pack told about itself. And because the pack had no clean narrative for what she was, it built an ugly one instead. Her father, Doran Ashvale, had been a beta of no particular distinction, a man who did his work and asked for little, and received precisely what he asked for. He had died when Mara was 11, taken by a border fever that swept through the eastern dens one brutal winter, and Mara had been raised after that by the communal care of the pack, which in practice meant she was raised by no one in particular and everyone's casual opinion simultaneously. Without a strong parent to shield her from the culture's harder edges, she absorbed every word. She catalogued every laugh. She memorized the names of everyone who had ever pointed at her in a training yard and turned to their companions with a smirk that said, without words, "Can you believe this is supposed to be one of us?" She was not supposed to be one of them in the way they meant it. She knew that now. But she had been a child once, and children believe the stories that surround them, and the story that surrounded Mara Ashvale for the first decade of her adult life was that she was less. Cain Drevth had become alpha of the Ironmore pack 4 years ago, at the age of 22, inheriting the position from his father, with the kind of seamless authority that only comes when a person has been preparing for something their entire life. He was tall, in the way that Ironmore celebrated, broad-shouldered and dark-eyed, with a stillness about him that most people mistook for coldness and a few perceptive individuals recognized as depth. He did not laugh easily. He did not speak carelessly. He ran the pack with the methodical precision of someone who understood that every decision he made would ripple outward into the lives of 300 wolves who depended on him for safety, for direction, for the invisible architecture of belonging that every pack needs to function. He had never called Mara the broken miniature. He had never called her the pocket wolf, or made the small cutting jokes that some of his warriors seemed to find so entertaining during training hours. But he had done something that Mara, in her private accounting of the world's cruelties, considered almost worse. He had looked at her and looked through her in the same motion, his dark eyes passing over her face without registering anything worth stopping for, as if she were furniture in a room he had already memorized. Indifference, she had come to understand, was its own kind of verdict. If you find yourself already feeling something for Mara before this story has even truly begun, I want you to take a moment right now and leave a comment below, telling me what word comes to mind when you think about someone who has been underestimated their whole life. I read every single one of your messages, and I promise you, this story is going to go places that will make every one of those comments feel worth writing. Now let us keep going. Training happened every morning in the great yard behind the Alpha's longhouse, a wide expanse of packed earth surrounded by wooden observation rails, where senior pack members sometimes gathered to watch the younger wolves work through their forms. Mara came to training every single day. This was a fact that the pack had long since stopped finding impressive and had begun to find vaguely irritating, the way a persistent minor inconvenience becomes irritating simply by refusing to go away. She, was always there before the others. She stretched in her corner, running through the joint rotations and muscle preparations she had developed herself over years of trial and error, a personal system that no trainer had ever taught her, because no trainer had ever taken her seriously enough to teach her anything at all. Gareth Voss was the pack's head trainer, and he was a man who had the specific kind of confidence that comes from never having been genuinely challenged. He was massive in the Ironmore tradition, 6 feet and 4 inches of muscle and certainty, and he had a laugh that filled a room the way smoke fills a room, getting into every corner whether you wanted it there or not. He did not hate Mara. She was fairly sure of that. He simply did not have a category for her, and when people lack a category for something, they tend to default to the nearest available joke. Ashvale, he called on a morning in late autumn, when the training yard was full and the air had the sharp, clean bite of coming frost. I have you paired with Dermot today for the grappling circuit. He said this the way someone might announce a punchline they already knew the response to. And sure enough, the ripple of laughter moved through the assembled wolves before Mara had even turned around to face Dermot Crane, who was 20 years old and 210 pounds, and who had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable with the attention, even as he tried to hide it behind a performative shrug. Mara walked to the center of the yard. She did not say anything. She had learned a long time ago that words in these moments only gave people more material to work with, and so she conserved her words the way a careful traveler conserves water in dry country, measuring out only what was strictly necessary and keeping the rest for herself. She took her stance, low and balanced the way she had taught herself from watching combat footage on the pack's shared screens, late at night when the common rooms were empty, and she looked at Dermot with the calm, patient attention of someone who is not afraid. He was good. She wanted to be fair about that, even in her own internal accounting. Dermot Crane was a genuinely skilled young warrior with fast reflexes and good instincts, and a grip that most opponents would have found immediately overwhelming. He came at her with confidence and a kind of casual force that expected to find nothing on the other end of it. And what he found instead was absence. Mara was not where he reached. She had moved, not dramatically, not with the showy athleticism that the training yard crowds tended to respond to, but with a quiet efficiency that placed her 2 feet to his left and slightly behind him in the time it took him to complete his forward momentum. She touched his left shoulder with the tips of 3 fingers as he passed, a gesture so light it seemed almost social, and yet something in the angle and the timing of it sent him stumbling forward in a way that cost him his balance and his dignity simultaneously. The yard went quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then Gareth Voss laughed, louder than anyone else, in the specific way that reframes an unexpected outcome as a joke rather than a result. "Lucky step, Ashvale," he said. Again. They went again. And again. And on the 4th exchange, Dermot, now frustrated and slightly embarrassed, came at her with genuine force, and Mara did something she almost never did in the training. Yard. She held her ground. She let him come, absorbed his momentum with a technique that should not have worked given the difference in their sizes, and absolutely did work, redirecting his force in a spiral that put him flat on his back on the packed earth with a sound that the entire yard felt in their chests. She stood over him for 1 breath, 2 breaths, then offered her hand. He took it. He was gracious about it, to his credit, but the yard did not respond the way it would have responded if a warrior of expected size had done the same thing. It responded with the particular discomfort of a group that has just seen its story contradicted and does not yet know how to update the story. Gareth Voss made another joke. Several people laughed. Mara returned to her corner and began her cool-down stretches. Cain Drevth watched from the observation rail. She did not know this. She never looked up at the rail because she had stopped expecting anything useful to come from that direction years ago. But he watched, and something behind his dark eyes shifted in a way that had no immediate name. The attack came on the first night of the new moon in November, when the sky was a black vault without a single point of light, and the Ironmore territory lay under the kind of silence that arrives just before everything changes. Mara was in her small den room in the eastern residential block, not sleeping, sitting cross-legged on her sleeping mat with a book of old pack histories open in her lap, when the alert sound cut through the settlement. 3 long tones. The rogue signal. She was dressed and moving in under 30 seconds. This was not bravery in the traditional sense, not the hot, loud courage that poets write about and warriors celebrate over fire. It was something quieter and more durable, the kind of readiness that comes from spending years preparing for a moment that you have been told, in every indirect way the world knows how to tell you something, will never be yours to have. She had prepared anyway. She had always prepared anyway. The rogues had come in from the northern tree line, a group of 17, which was a significant raiding force by any standard, and an overwhelming one for a settlement waking up to an alarm at 2 a.m. They moved with coordination that suggested organization, not the frantic desperation of hungry strays, but the calculated pressure of wolves with a purpose. Later, when everything was over and the elders were sorting through what had happened and why, they would determine that the rogues had been sent by a rival territory seeking to test Ironmore's defenses ahead of a larger territorial dispute. But in the moment, in the dark, and the shouting and the sound of bodies hitting the ground at the settlement's northern perimeter, there was no strategic clarity. There was only the immediate reality of harm arriving faster than anyone had fully prepared for. Mara moved through the settlement toward the sounds of fighting. The way water moves through terrain, finding the path of least resistance, not out of cowardice, but out of the deep instinctive intelligence that had always been her most misunderstood quality. She reached the northern perimeter and assessed in the span of a single breath. 2 of the pack's senior warriors were down, not dead. She could hear them breathing from 20 feet away, but incapacitated. 3 rogues had broken through the first defensive line. 4 more were pressing against it from outside. The young warriors still standing were holding, but barely, and the specific quality of their effort had the brittle, expensive quality of effort that is about to give out. And then something happened inside Mara Ashvale that she had felt before, in small and private ways, in moments alone in the woods when no one was watching, but never like this, never at this magnitude, never with this particular quality of opening, as if a door she had not known existed had been standing shut inside. Her chest for 22 years, and now, in the dark and the cold and the necessity of this moment, it simply swung wide. The spirit of the Silent Lynx did not announce itself. It did not come with light or sound, or the dramatic supernatural markers that the old stories used to describe moments of ancestral awakening. It came the way silence comes when a loud room empties out, not as an addition, but as a revelation of what had always been there. Mara moved, and the movement was different. Her body was the same body it had always been, 155 centimeters, slight and economical. But the intelligence moving it was ancient and had no patience for the limitations that fear and self-doubt and other people's opinions tend to impose on a body's willingness to act. She hit the first rogue from behind without making a sound. He had 100 pounds on her, and it did not matter, because she did not meet his mass with her mass. She met his mass with geometry, with the specific application of force at the specific point where his body's own momentum could be turned against itself. And he went down with a sound that the other rogues heard and turned toward and found nothing, because Mara was already gone, already moving, already 3 feet to the left and reading the next angle of approach. If you are watching this at home and you have chills right now, I need you to hit that like button because I can feel this story building toward something, and I want every single person who is feeling what I am feeling right now to make their presence known. This is the moment. This is the moment she has been waiting for without even knowing she was waiting for it. Keep watching. The second rogue was larger than the first, smarter too. The kind of fighter who adjusted rather than simply escalating. And Mara felt the quality of his attention shift toward her in the dark with the specific sensation of being correctly perceived, which was alarming in its own way. He circled. She circled. He feinted left, and she did not follow the feint, because something in the pattern of his weight distribution had told her 3 seconds ago which way he would actually commit. And when he committed, she was already there, not to block him, but to guide him, her hands finding the joint and the angle and the leverage that turned his own forward force into a controlled fall that landed him precisely where she needed him to land. She moved through the next 12 minutes the way. A piece of music moves through its own structure, each element arising from what came before it. Nothing wasted, nothing performed. 3 rogues neutralized in the first 4 minutes. 2 more redirected into each other in a collision that left both of them stunned and disoriented on the cold ground. The defensive line stabilized. The young warriors, energized by something they could feel, but not yet name, pressed their advantage, and the rogues at the perimeter began to retreat. It was in the final 3 minutes of the engagement that Mara found herself between the last standing rogue and a fallen figure she recognized, even in the dark, by the specific stillness of his silhouette. Cain Drevth had come out in the first minutes of the alarm, as Alpha Protocol required, had engaged 2 rogues simultaneously, and had taken a hit to the temple that had left him on one knee in the dirt, conscious but compromised, his vision clearly uncertain from the way his head moved, the rogue advancing. On him was the largest of the group, the one she had assessed first from the perimeter and deliberately saved for last, because something in his movement patterns had told her he required a different kind of attention. He was 6 feet and 2 inches, and he moved like someone who had been fighting seriously for 20 years and had won the vast majority of those fights. He saw Cain down, and he saw the clear path, and he was not the kind of person who hesitated in front of a clear path. He moved. Mara stepped into the space between them, not dramatically, not with words or posture designed to provoke a reaction. She simply arrived in the space where the rogue needed to go, and she looked at him with the calm, patient attention of the Silent Lynx, which has no ego, which does not need to perform, which simply is what it is, in the most complete and total sense of that phrase. He looked at her. He actually laughed, a short, contemptuous sound. And then he came at her. Everything he had, the full weight and force and experience of a wolf who had been winning fights since before Mara was born. What happened next took 11 seconds. The pack's security footage later counted the frames. In 11 seconds, the largest rogue in the raiding party went from upright and advancing to face down and motionless on the cold November ground, and Mara stood over him breathing quietly, her hands at her sides, her face expressing nothing more dramatic than the focused attention of someone who has just completed a task that required concentration. She looked down at him for one breath. Then she turned to Cain. He was looking at her. He was looking at her the way people look at something that has fundamentally rearranged their understanding of the world, not with the loud shock of surprise, but with the deep, quiet rearrangement of someone processing information that cannot be unfiled. His dark eyes were fully present, the way they had never been present when they passed over her face in the past, and Mara felt the difference between being seen and being looked through with a physical clarity that she had not expected. She said nothing. She held out her hand. He took it, and she helped him to his feet, and when he was standing, he was a full head taller than her. And it did not feel like the kind of height differential that meant what the Ironmore culture said it meant. It felt like 2 wolves standing in the same space, which was, she was beginning to understand, all it had ever needed to be. The settlement gathered at dawn. This was pack tradition after a security event, a collective accounting of what had happened and what it meant. The 17 rogues were in custody. The 2 senior warriors who had been incapacitated were recovering, their injuries significant, but not permanent. 9 pack members owed their safety to interventions made in the dark by a wolf most of them had spent years treating as a comfortable joke. Gareth Voss was quiet in a way Mara had never seen him be quiet before. He stood with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and his eyes moving across the assembled pack with the expression of someone recalculating something they had believed they already understood. He did not look at Mara. She noticed this the way she noticed most things, with an internal precision that she kept carefully off her face. Cain stood at the front of the gathering in his traditional position, and he had a bandage at his temple and a quality of deliberateness in his posture that told Mara he was choosing every word with unusual care. He spoke about the attack. He spoke about the pack's response. He acknowledged the warriors who had held the line. And then he paused, and in that pause the entire gathered pack felt something shifting, the way you feel a weather change before any visible sign of it arrives. "There is someone I need to address directly," Cain said, and his voice had the carrying quality of alpha authority without any of the performative volume that lesser leaders use to compensate for uncertainty. "And I want every member of this pack to hear what I say, because what I say reflects not only on me, but on the culture we have built here, and on the ways that culture has sometimes failed the wolves it was supposed to serve." He turned. He looked at Mara. Not through her. At her, with the full, complete attention of someone who has made a decision and is standing fully inside it. "Mara Ashvale," he said, "last night you neutralized 11 of 17 attacking rogues. You stabilized a defensive line that was failing. You protected 9 members of this pack, including myself. You did this without being asked, without being assigned to a defensive position, without any of the official recognition or training support that the warriors who held lesser portions of last night's defense received as a matter of standard procedure." He paused. "You did this after years of being dismissed and diminished in this yard and in this community, including by systems and silences that I was responsible for as Alpha and did not correct." The gathering was so quiet that Mara could hear the frost on the grass melting in the thin winter sunlight. She stood very still. Something was happening inside her chest that was not quite emotion in any simple sense, more like the interior rearrangement that Cain had shown on his face the night before. The sensation of a story being rewritten at its foundation. Cain lowered himself to one knee on the cold ground. Not his fighting knee, not the compromised position he had been in when she found him the night before. A deliberate, chosen position. The position of formal pack acknowledgement, which Mara had seen performed for senior warriors after great battles and had, in her most private and carefully guarded imaginings, occasionally allowed herself to picture being performed for her before dismissing the image as the kind of thinking that led nowhere useful. "I am asking the pack to formally recognize the strength, the skill, and the service of Mara Ashvale," Cain said. "And I am asking Mara Ashvale to forgive a failure of attention that should never have been allowed to persist. Do not go anywhere. I need you to understand what is happening inside Mara right now, because this moment is not simple, and it is not clean, and that is exactly what makes it real. If you want to know how she responds, if you want to know what she says to an alpha who has just knelt in the dirt of the training yard where she was mocked for years, if you want to know whether forgiveness comes easily or costs something, I need you to subscribe to this channel right now and ring that notification bell. Because what happens next is the part of this story that I have been building toward from the first sentence. Stay with me." She looked at him for a long time. The pack waited. Gareth Voss uncrossed his arms and crossed them again. Several of the younger wolves who had fought beside her in the dark were watching her face with an attentiveness that told her they were drawing their own conclusions from whatever they found there. "Get up," Mara said. Her voice was quiet and even, the way it was always quiet and even, carrying in the silence not because she forced it to carry, but because she had learned a long time ago that a voice does not need volume to have weight. "What you just did was right," she said. "It is not enough, and I think you know that. And I think the pack needs to understand. That too. Kneeling in a yard is a gesture. What comes after this is the work. Those are different things, and I will not pretend otherwise." Cain rose. He held her gaze. "I know," he said. "Tell me what the work looks like." It was the correct response. She had not been certain he had it in him, and the fact that he did moved something in her assessment of him that she was not entirely prepared for. She had built walls over years with the specific and careful architecture of someone who has learned through experience that they need them, and those walls did not fall down simply because a person said the right thing, but they registered the right thing. They noted it. They filed it under a category she had kept mostly empty for a long time, labeled evidence that it might be worth trying. "It starts with the training program," she said. "Not with me. with the culture of the program, with what we teach young wolves to value and what we teach them to dismiss, with whether Gareth Voss continues to run those sessions the way he has been running them for 12 years, or whether someone with a different understanding of what strength looks like takes a meaningful role in what we teach and how we teach it. She paused. It continues with formal recognition of the warriors who held the perimeter last night, all of them, without qualifications about size or rank. And it continues with whatever investigation the elders need to conduct into why a raiding party of 17 rogues was able to reach our settlement before our defense systems identified them, because last night revealed vulnerabilities that have nothing to do with me, and everything to do with the structural assumptions this pack makes about where threats come from and how they move. The gathering was very still. Cain looked at her with the full, unguarded attention he had turned on her in the dark. And there was something in his expression that was not the administrative assessment of an alpha processing a subordinate's recommendations. It was the specific quality of attention a person gives when they are not just hearing the words, but recognizing the mind behind the words, and realizing they have been in proximity to that mind for a long time without once pausing to look. "Those are good recommendations," he said. "They are not recommendations," Mara said, and her voice was still even, still carrying, still the voice of someone who has finished performing and is now simply speaking. "They are the conditions under which I will continue to invest in this pack's future. I love Ironmore. I have always loved Ironmore, even when it gave me very little reason to. But love is not the same as unconditional acceptance of the ways things are, and I will not be used as a symbol of the pack's willingness to change if that willingness does not extend into the actual structure of how we live." Cain held her gaze for 3 breaths. Then he nodded, a single, deliberate movement. "Agreed," he said. "All of it. It was the beginning, not the ending." Mara understood this with the same clarity she brought to everything, and she was grateful for the understanding, because it protected her from the particular failure mode of believing that one correct public gesture meant that the years of quiet erosion had been undone. They had not been undone. They had been acknowledged, which was necessary and real and worth something. But acknowledgement was not repair. Repair was what came next, in the daily, unglamorous work of institutions changing their habits, which happens slowly and imperfectly, and requires sustained attention from people who have the power to enforce it, and the will to do so, even when the momentum of the old way is pulling in the other direction. She spent the 3 days after the attack largely alone, which was her preference, and which the pack, perhaps reading something new in the air around her, gave her without the casual intrusions that had marked her solitude before. She ran in the mornings along the eastern trail where the forest came close to the settlement boundary, moving through the cold air with the quiet, unhurried pace of someone who is not trying to impress anyone, and therefore can move exactly as efficiently and comfortably as the body actually wants to move. She thought about what she wanted. She had spent so many years thinking about what she did not want, cataloging the specific shapes of the culture's failures, that the question of what she actually wanted for herself had a slightly unfamiliar quality, like a language she had learned to read, but not yet practiced speaking aloud. She wanted recognition that was earned and sustained rather than performed. She wanted the training program reformed in ways that she had been mentally designing for years, because she had had nothing to do during the long hours of being ignored except to pay attention and to think. And she had thought rigorously about what a genuinely effective training program would look like if it were designed around actual combat effectiveness rather than around the cultural preference for a particular physical type. She wanted, she thought, to teach. And the recognition that this was something she wanted came with a small shock of clarity that arrived on the second morning run and stayed with her for the rest of the day. And there was the other thing, the thing that she examined carefully and honestly in the private space of her own mind, without the distortion of wishful thinking or defensive cynicism, because she was committed to seeing clearly, even when what she was seeing was complicated and uncertain. Cain Drevth had looked at her. He had continued to look at her. She had seen him at the periphery of her morning runs, not following, not intruding, present in the way that someone is present when they are trying to figure out the correct distance to maintain, without yet having been given guidance on the question. She found this not irritating, as she might have expected, but interesting. He was learning to read a situation he had previously not bothered to pay attention to, and the fact that he was learning rather than defaulting to the alpha habit of simply proceeding according to his own certainty was information she was not prepared to discard. On the fourth morning, he was at the trailhead when she arrived for her run, not positioned to intercept, but there in an unmistakably deliberate way, standing with his hands in you, his jacket pockets and his dark eyes on the middle distance with the focused non-focus of someone who has prepared what they want to say, and is now quietly revising it. "I spoke with Gareth yesterday," he said, when she stopped near him. "He will move to an advisory role. Senna Voth will take the lead training position." He paused. "Senna asked if you would be willing to co-design the new curriculum. She said, and I am quoting her exactly, that she would rather have your brain on this problem than any other resource available to her." Senna Voth was 28 and had run the Pack's youth combat program for 3 years with results that consistently exceeded expectations, and she had never once laughed at Mara in a training yard. Mara filed this piece of information in the part of her mind where she kept evidence of good things. "I am willing," Mara said. Cain nodded. He was quiet for a moment in the way he was sometimes quiet, the depth rather than coldness quality that she had, learned to distinguish from the performing distance quality she had initially assumed it was. "The Elder Council met yesterday," he said. "The Northern Perimeter Defense System is being redesigned from the ground up. 3 of the assumptions that allowed last week's incursion to go undetected until it was almost too late have been formally identified and are being dismantled." He paused again. "The 9 wolves you protected have each requested a formal audience with you. Not to thank you, necessarily, though I imagine that will happen. More to say something to you that I think they believe needs to be said person to person." Mara thought about this. "I will meet with them," she said. "One at a time. On my schedule. Of course." He glanced at her, and there was something in the glance that was not administrative, that belonged to a different register of attention. "Would you be willing to have dinner with me tonight? Not a formal thing, not a pack thing. Just dinner. With me." She looked at him for a long moment. The frost was still on the grass, and the morning air had the particular cold clarity that she had always associated with important moments. Not because cold air made moments important, but because important moments tended, in her experience, to arrive in conditions that matched them, as if the world had a certain sense of appropriate staging. "I have conditions," she said. He did not smile, exactly, but something around his eyes moved. "I assumed you would," he said. "Tell me what they are. This does not become a thing that the pack watches and reads and uses to manage their feelings about everything that has happened. Whatever this is, if it becomes anything, it belongs to us first, and to the pack's social calendar last." "Agreed. You tell me the truth even when it is complicated, especially when it is complicated. I have spent years being surrounded by people who preferred a comfortable simplification to an honest complexity, and I do not have the patience for that anymore." "Agreed." His voice was even, present. "And if this does not work, if what we are between us does not turn into something worth sustaining, you do not revert. The changes in the pack, the training program, the perimeter redesign, the formal recognition of every wolf who held that line, none of that gets quietly undone because of what happens or does not happen between the two of us. Those things exist independently of this." He looked at her for a long time. "Those things exist independently of this," he said, not repeating it as a rote agreement, but speaking it as a statement of his own understanding, a confirmation that he had followed the argument and arrived at the same position. "Yes, then I will have dinner with you tonight," Mara said, and she turned and ran the eastern trail in the cold morning air, moving with the quiet efficiency of the Silent Lynx. And she did not look back, and she did not need to. "Now, before I keep going, I need to take a second to check in with you, because I know that what is building between Mara and Cain is complicated, and I know some of you are rooting for it hard, and some of you have questions, and all of those responses are completely valid. Drop them in the comments right now. Tell me what you think about Mara's conditions. Tell me if you think Cain is going to hold to his word when the work gets hard. Tell me which moment in this story so far has hit you the hardest. I read everything, and I will respond to as many of you as I can. And if this story is moving you the way I hope it is moving you, please share it with someone in your life who needs to hear a story about someone who refused to let the world's small vision of them become their vision of themselves. Okay, let us keep going. Dinner was in the Alpha's private residence, which was a building Mara had been inside exactly twice before, both times for formal pack business. It looked different at night, with the fire in the main hearth and the table set simply without any of the ceremony that Alpha residences tended to accumulate like furniture. Cain cooked, which she had not expected, and he was competent at it in the same way he seemed to be competent at most practical things, without flourish, with attention to what the task actually required. They talked for 3 hours. Not about the attack, not about the pack reforms, about the kinds of things that two people talk about when they are feeling out the actual shape of each other's minds, rather than the shape of their respective roles. She asked him about the moment he had become Alpha, what it had felt like to inherit that position from his father, whether it had felt like receiving a gift, or accepting a weight, or something more complicated than either of those simple metaphors. He told her the truth, which was that it had felt like all three simultaneously, and that he had not known how to separate those experiences, and that the not knowing had produced, over 4 years, a particular kind of loneliness that he had managed by staying so fully occupied with the work that there was no interior space left over for the loneliness to make itself comfortable in. That is a functional strategy, Mara said. It is also exactly the strategy that leads to not seeing what is in front of you, because when you fill your interior space entirely with work, there is no room for perception, and perception requires a certain amount of open space to happen in. He was quiet for a long time. Yes, he said. That is accurate. I am not saying this to be critical, she said, because she was also committed to being honest about her own processes, and she did not want him to misread her observation as an attack. I am saying it because I think it is relevant to understanding how someone can stand in the same space as another person for 4 years and never actually see them. It is not cruelty. It is a failure of interior availability. Is it easier to forgive a failure of interior availability than a cruelty? She thought about it. In some ways, she said. In other ways, it is harder. Cruelty has a cause you can address and change. Interior unavailability is more structural. It requires dismantling the whole system, not fixing a specific part. Are you willing to wait for the dismantling? She looked at him across the table. The fire made moving light on his face. He was not performing any of the authority she was accustomed to seeing on him, the careful, managed alpha presence that he wore in public like a working garment. He looked like a person. Just a person. Sitting across from another person, asking an honest question, in the full knowledge that the honest answer might not be what he was hoping for. I have been patient my entire adult life, she said. The question is whether I am willing to invest that patience in a direction that might actually yield something worth having. She paused. I think I am willing to try. That is not the same as a promise of outcome. It is an honest statement of willingness. He nodded. He reached across the table, not grabbing, not claiming, just placing his hand where she could reach it if she chose to. She looked at his hand. Then she placed her fingers on his, lightly, the way she had placed her fingers on Dermot Crane's shoulder in the training yard, except that this was not a technique, and this was not redirecting anyone's momentum. And this was, she recognized with a clarity, that felt simultaneously alarming and completely right, something she was choosing for herself. The weeks that followed were a season of transformation that the Ironmore pack would discuss for years. Not because transformation came easily, or without conflict, because it did not, but because it came genuinely, which is rarer and more valuable than the smooth, packaged version of change that institutions sometimes perform for their own audiences. Gareth Voss took his advisory role with a grace that surprised everyone, including himself, contributing the deep, accumulated knowledge of 12 years of training observation in ways that turned out to be genuinely useful when directed toward building something rather than defending something. He came to Mara 3 weeks into the new program's development, and told her that watching her fight had rearranged his understanding in a way he did not have elegant language for, and that he was sorry for the years of dismissal, and that he understood. If the sorry did not land as easily as he wished it would. It lands where it lands, Mara told him, which is better than nowhere. Do the work and the sorry will mean more over time. That is how it works with things like this. Drevth was, as predicted, an excellent collaborator, bringing to the curriculum design process an energy and creativity that Mara's methodical precision needed, and that in return was given structure and rigor by Mara's systematic thinking. They worked 4 days a week in the training facility's back office, which had previously been used for equipment storage and was now cleared and furnished with a workable simplicity, and they disagreed productively and often, which is the sign of a good working partnership rather than the sign of a failing one. The new curriculum took shape over 6 weeks, a program that evaluated wolves on the full range of combat-relevant qualities and refused to treat any single physical attribute as the primary indicator of fighting capacity. The 9 wolves Mara had protected came to her one by one, on her schedule, as she had specified. Their conversations were private, and she kept them private, but the pack could see something happening in each of those wolves afterward. A quality of reckoning, as if each meeting had required them to hold something they had been carrying at arm's length and actually feel the weight of it. Dermot Crane was the last of the 9 to come. He sat across from her for 20 minutes, without saying anything that was not about the weather, and then finally he said that he had always known the training yard dynamics were not right, but that knowing a thing is wrong, and actually doing anything about it are different activities with different costs, and that he had consistently chosen to pay the lower cost, and that he was sorry. You fought well on the perimeter, Mara said. You held your position for 20 minutes under pressure and you never broke. That matters to me. Use the ability you have in service of building something worth being a part of. He left looking lighter. She did not know what to do with that exactly, but she let it be. Cain held to his word. This was not a small thing, and she did not treat it as a small thing. He held to his word in the visible ways, the formal announcements and the structural changes, and the Elder Council proceedings where he advocated consistently and specifically for the reforms they had discussed. And he held to his word in the less visible ways that Mara was, by training and disposition, more attentive to. When the social pressure of the pack's old habits manifested in subtle ways, in the casual conversations where someone defaulted to the old frameworks and looked to him for the validation that would have previously been automatic, he did not provide that validation. He redirected, gently but completely, to the new framework. It cost him something each time. She could see that it cost him, because she had learned to read him the way he was learning to read her. And the cost was worth paying, and he paid it without complaint and without requiring her to notice. She noticed anyway. She told him so, on an evening when they were walking the settlement boundary together, in the way they had begun to do on evenings when neither of them had immediate responsibilities pulling them elsewhere. I see what you are doing in those conversations, she said, the ones where it would be easier to let something slide. You are not supposed to be evaluating me, he said. But the tone was not defensive. It was warm in the specific way of someone who is not accustomed to being seen clearly, and is still, improbably, glad of it. I evaluate everything, she said. That has never been something I could turn off, and I stopped trying years ago. Consider it an occupational feature of the specific kind of attention I bring to the world. I consider it, he said, one of the things about you that I understand least and find most compelling. She looked up at him, because even walking beside her, he was substantially taller, and looking up was simply the geography of his presence in relation to hers. Most people find it exhausting, she said. Most people are not paying the right kind of attention, he said. The bond between them built the way real bonds build, which is slowly and with friction, and without the clean, effortless narrative arc that stories sometimes impose on things that in reality are more interesting for being complicated. There were evenings when their different approaches to problem-solving produced genuine tension, when Cain's instinct for decisive unilateral action ran up against Mara's insistence on understanding the full picture before moving, and they had to find the specific productive version of that tension, rather than the destructive one. There were conversations where the accumulated weight of the years before their seeing each other surfaced in ways that required both of them to hold the discomfort without reaching for easy resolution. She was not always able to be generous in those moments, and she said so plainly when she was not, which was itself a form of trust that she was still learning to offer. He was learning too. The interior space he had filled for 4 years with the work of being alpha was opening slowly, unevenly, the way spaces open when they have been closed for a long time. He was not always capable of occupying that open space with comfort, and there were moments when she could see him reaching for the manageable certainty of his role, rather than the more demanding uncertainty of genuine presence. And she called it when she saw it, not harshly but honestly, because she had made a commitment to honesty that she was not prepared to compromise, and she expected the same commitment from him. He met it, not perfectly, but with the genuine effort of someone who has understood that the standard he is being held to is the right standard, and who has chosen, with full knowledge of its difficulty, to accept it. The autumn became winter, became the first weeks of a new year, and the Ironmore pack was a different place from what it had been the previous November, in ways that were visible and measurable, and in ways that were more subtle. The kind of cultural shift that shows up in the small daily interactions rather than in the formal documents, in whether a young wolf feels comfortable voicing a counterintuitive assessment in a training session, in whether the reaction to an unexpected outcome in a practice bout is curiosity or a joke. Mara ran the Eastern Trail every morning, and the pack no longer seemed surprised to see her. This was, she thought, the most accurate measure of genuine change available to her. Not the ceremony, not the formal acknowledgments, not even the curriculum, though she was proud of the curriculum and what it was producing in the pack's younger generation. The measure was whether she had become, in the daily grain of life at Ironmore, a person whose presence required no explanation, whose contribution was simply expected as a matter of course, whose right to be exactly what she was and exactly the size she was had been absorbed into the culture's basic assumptions, rather than remaining an exception that had to be argued for each time. On a morning in February, with the territory still under a clean coat of snow, and the air having the particular quality of cold that feels more like clarification than discomfort, Cain found her at the trailhead again. He had a travel bag over his shoulder, and she looked at it, and then at him, with the question on her face. "There is a summit with 3 neighboring territories in 2 days," he said. "I would like you to come. Not as a security resource, as a member of the diplomatic delegation." He paused. "As the person who, in my assessment and the assessment of the Elder Council, has the clearest strategic mind in this pack and should be using it in every context where it is relevant." Mara was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about the first training session she had attended after the attack, when Voth had introduced the new curriculum structure to the assembled pack and had specifically credited Mara's analytical framework as the foundation of the assessment methodology. She was thinking about what it had felt like to be credited clearly and publicly, not for the dramatic visible action of a combat night, but for the sustained invisible work of thinking carefully about something for a very long time. It had felt like being read correctly, which was rarer than she had expected it to be. "I will need to review the diplomatic briefing documents before we travel," she said. "They are already in your inbox," Cain said. "I sent them last night." She nodded. She looked at the snowy trail. Then she looked back at him. "You are getting better at this," she said. "I have good reasons to try," he said. She held his gaze for a moment that had the quality of mutual, unspoken acknowledgement. The kind that does not require words because the words have already been said, and said again, and have by this point settled into the shared understanding between 2 people who have done the work of learning to see each other clearly. Then she turned toward the trail. "Run with me," she said. He fell into step beside her, adjusting his pace to match hers without making an event of it. And they ran together, through the clean winter air of the Ironmore territory, 2 wolves moving through their world at a pace that was, for the first time in a long time, exactly right for both of them. Before we get to the epilogue, I need to pause here and ask you something. This story has been about more than just Mara and Cain. It has been about what it costs to be underestimated. It has been about what it takes to change not just a person, but a whole culture. It has been about the difference between being forgiven and earning the right to be forgiven through sustained, consistent, unglamorous work. If any part of this story has spoken to something in your own experience, something you carry quietly or something you are trying to put down, I want you to know that the comment section of this video is a space for that. Tell me your story. Tell me who you are and what you have refused to let the world make you. And if this channel has given you something, if these stories have been the company you needed on a long commute or a quiet evening or a difficult day, please subscribe and ring that bell and share this video with someone who is fighting the fight that Mara fought. They need to hear this story. Now here is the epilogue. Epilogue. 3 years after the night of the rogue attack, the Ironmore Pack hosted the regional summit for the first time in its history. A gathering of 8 neighboring territories brought together to address a shared environmental crisis threatening the forest corridor that all of them depended on. The summit was Mara's design, the product of 18 months of diplomatic work that had begun with her attendance at that first 2-territory meeting in February, and had grown, iteration by careful iteration, into a framework for regional cooperation that none of the territories had previously believed was achievable. She stood at the head of the assembly table in the great hall of the Ironmore Longhouse, which had been cleared of its traditional hunting trophies for the occasion and filled instead with the maps and data projections that formed the evidentiary basis of the environmental proposal. And she spoke for 40 minutes to 8 alpha representatives from 8 different pack cultures, with 8 different traditions and 8 different sets of assumptions about what a pack representative should look and sound like. None of them laughed. Not one. They listened the way people listen when the information coming at them is too important and too well presented to interrupt, with the focused, slightly uncomfortable attention of people whose existing understanding is being productively challenged. When she finished, the eldest alpha in the room, a woman of 70, who had led her pack for 35 years and who was not given to easily expressing approval, said that the presentation was the clearest strategic analysis she had encountered in a career's worth of regional summits, and that she would be recommending adoption of the proposal to her elder council. Mara accepted this with a nod. She did not perform modesty and she did not perform triumph. She simply received the recognition as accurate and moved on to the logistical discussion, because there was work to do, and the work was more interesting than the recognition. Cain sat at the end of the table, not at the head, because this was Mara's summit, and its arrangement reflected that reality without apology. He had his hands folded in front of him, and his dark eyes were on her face, and his expression had the quality she had come to know best in him, the specific quality of full, unhurried attention that she had waited years for him to turn in her direction, and that he now turned with a consistency that had stopped surprising her and started simply being part of the landscape of her daily life. After the session, in the brief pause between the formal assembly and the working dinner, she came to stand beside him at the window that looked out over the settlement, and he put his arm around her shoulders in the easy way of someone who has been granted explicit and repeated permission to do so, and who has learned to offer it without ceremony, and they looked out at the territory together. "The eastern perimeter expansion is complete," he said. "The new den block is ready for the 3 families who requested it." "I know," she said. "I reviewed the final survey this morning." "Of course you did. Someone has to." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but occupied the warm territory adjacent to it. She leaned into his side, which was a gesture she had given herself permission to make without strategy attached to it, simply because she wanted to, and because wanting to was sufficient reason. Below them, the settlement moved through its afternoon, wolves crossing the yard and gathering at the training facility, and sitting in groups at the tables outside the communal kitchen, a community living its ordinary life with a completeness, an ease that Mara recognized, when she paid attention to it, as the accumulated product of every difficult thing that had been asked and answered, and worked through and held and changed over the past 3 years. She was not the broken miniature. She had never been the broken miniature. She was the thing the pack had not had the vision to see until necessity provided the lens. And she was grateful for the necessity because it had given her a stage on which her actual self had room to stand. And she was not grateful for the years before it, because she was not interested in retrospectively finding meaning in harm that could have been prevented by anyone who had been paying the right kind of attention. She held both of those truths simultaneously, and she did not feel compelled to resolve them into a tidy lesson, because she had learned that some of the most important truths are not lessons. They are simply what is, held clearly, in the full light of an accurate attention. "What are you thinking?" Cain asked. "That this is good," she said. "That it took longer than it should have and cost more than it needed to, and arrived in a form that is better than I was sometimes able to believe it would be." She paused. "And that tomorrow, the curriculum oversight report is due, and I would like to review your comments on the preliminary draft before we go into the working dinner." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. She looked at it, then she took it, because of Var. Of course she took it, and she unfolded it, and began to read with the quiet, precise attention that she brought to everything that mattered. And outside the window, the Iron Moorpack went about the ordinary sacred work of a community that had learned, through difficulty and honesty, and the sustained pressure of one wolf's refusal to be less than she was, to see itself more truly than it had before. The Silent Lynx did not roar. It did not need to. It moved through the world with a precision and a patience that the world, eventually, and at significant cost to its own comfortable assumptions, had learned to be still enough to perceive. And in that stillness, everything had changed. Thank you for watching this story all the way to its end. If Mara's journey stayed with you, if any part of this touched something true in your own life, please leave a comment, share this video, and subscribe to this channel. Every story told here is for the wolves who have been told they are too small, too quiet, too unlike what power is supposed to look like. You are not too small. You are simply waiting for the right darkness to show them what you are. I will see you in the next story.